Today, I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Swan Private. Now, you know from listening to this show that our money is broken. Fortunately, we have Bitcoin, a better money that will help us build a brighter future. But if you don't have a Bitcoin strategy and a trusted partner to help you execute that strategy, then you're probably going to fall behind. Now, I've known the Swan Bitcoin team for years. The Bitcoiners at Swan are mission-driven and have deep expertise and respect in the Bitcoin space. In my opinion, this is the team you want on your side. Today, I'd like to highlight Swan's Private Client Services division, which guides high net worth individuals and businesses around the world toward building and preserving wealth with Bitcoin. So visit swanprivate.com and learn how this concierge service gives you direct access to your dedicated Bitcoin advisor by phone, messaging, and email. Swan will guide you on complex areas such as self-custody, or you can choose to hold your Bitcoin through Swan with one of the largest US-regulated custodians. So, make your first purchase with Swan Private and get $100 of Bitcoin. Just tell them that I sent you. You know, an opportunity like this to build and preserve legacy impacting wealth for your family and company will not likely be seen again in our lifetimes. Sign up at swanprivate.com today, mention Breed Love to your advisor, and get $100 in free Bitcoin when you make your first buy. Nozomi Hayase. I hope I said that correctly. Welcome to the What is Money show.
Thank you for having me, Robert. It's a great honor to be on your show.
Thank you so much. It's really great to have you here. You know, the writing you've been putting out on the deeper aspects of Bitcoin, let's say, has been very good. So I'm happy that we're getting to talk and explore some of this. Maybe by way of introduction, if you want to give just a quick background on yourself, how you discovered Bitcoin, what you're doing currently. I guess I should say for the audience, like how we connected. You're a known Bitcoin proponent. You're a wonderful writer. We connected on Twitter. Again, big fan of your writing. So I wanted to have you on and talk through some of this. But if you want to give the audience a little bit of background, that would be helpful.
Okay, yeah. So, since I was young, that I was always interested in finding out who am I, the question of who am I, or the purpose of life, you know, the big philosophical questions, I guess. And it was because I felt like if we don't understand who we are as human beings, I felt like we cannot even start a life, you know. So these philosophical questions really drove me. And then that led me to study philosophy and psychology. So I have, my background is in academia. So I studied psychology intensively. And then, initially I thought that it's how the society works is that, you know, maybe a bunch of psychologists or philosophers, basically the experts, so to speak, you know, they are maybe having meetings in a closed door or behind closed doors and deciding, you know, or defining what it means to be human. And then somehow that knowledge is passed on through education or, you know, through institutions, and then kind of create the incentives, I guess, to make us behave in a certain way. And then as I study more and more, as I study psychology more and more, I started to recognize that this is not really the case, you know, that it's not the people in academia, you know, the experts are coordinating this and doing this, but it's more of the economic forces, how money is used, how the financial systems, along with political system, are used to push humanity in a certain direction. So then I found Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is money. And for me, what fascinated me the most is how somehow Bitcoin brought new incentives, and how through this money, you know, there's a new network is created, and people started to behave differently. So that, you know, really caught my eyes, and then as Max Kaiser often says, like, we don't change Bitcoin, you know, Bitcoin changes us, right? So he always pointed out, and I started to really witness that phenomena, that how
Right.
Deploying this new code, and this technology, somehow people started to behave differently. And so I got very much interested in Bitcoin from that angle. And then, so my foremost interest in Bitcoin is people who are in this space and how the interaction between a code and human beings and interface between human behavior and economics, I guess. And then, so around that time when I discovered Bitcoin, at the same time, I started to, I learned about cryptography, the power of cryptography, and then how the code is law. I started to hear this expression, code is law, that regulate human behavior one way or the other. So then I soon made a connection that it's not just a bunch of expert, psychologists controlling our behavior, implementing the school curriculum. I mean, of course, that there is that component too, but it's more of the deployment of code, deployment of incentives through economic forces, and then that, kind of automates certain kind of system that makes us behave in a certain way. So then, obviously, I found the potential of Bitcoin to change the system at the global scale, at the large scale, by changing the code, changing incentives, and then allowing us to act with laws of nature, fundamental principles that guide us. And at the core of Bitcoin, at the end of, kind of my search, my investigation or exploration, which is continuous process, which I wouldn't think it would ever end. But I've kind of found that what is at the core of Bitcoin is an uncorrupted view of humanity, the accurate view of humanity that is aligned with our human nature. And because of it, I think Bitcoin brings us back to, back to natural world, or align human civilization with its foundation. So then everything just became clear to me that this is it. This is what I was looking for in my entire life. And, Bitcoin basically gives us, Bitcoin rabbit hole experience, that we kind of enter into. It's a process of knowing ourselves, this know thyself, right? It's the engages us in a deep search for truth about who we are.
Right.
So, for me, it's like Bitcoin, it's psychology, Bitcoin, it's philosophy. So that's kind of, how everything kind of came to, wholeness, I guess, with Bitcoin.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. That's a beautiful introduction and fascinating story. We can pause for a minute if we need to. Yeah. Yeah. I love you describe, incentives sculpting our actions, really, which I think if you really drill down into not just human psychology, but it seems like even animal psychology, they respond to incentives, right? So we can direct, I don't want to say the only determinant, but a prime determinant of human action is the incentive schema that he or she inhabits.
Exactly.
And this ties directly into Charlie Munger's quote, right? Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. So the incentives themselves that we codify, right? We create the systems, we create the incentive systems that we inhabit. We build our own homes, we build our own nation states, our own legal systems, all of that. But those constructions reflect back into us, right? They change our psychology, change our modes of action, modes of being.
Exactly.
And this is important too, because as you said, code is law.
Yeah.
This does not just mean software code. The US Constitution is code, right? We wrote a code and we built a civilization around it. And in that scope, Bitcoin is essentially a better form of code, or a more unbreakable form of code, maybe. I've often said, the US Constitution is great if you interpret it in its purest sense, but because it's just scribbles on a sheet of paper and there aren't real incentives that like give it teeth the way Bitcoin has teeth, it's sort of inferior, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think that Bitcoin is actually a fulfillment of the U.S. Constitution, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, the foundation of the U.S. Constitution is really it involves the question of how to, you know, how to balance the you know, how to build a civilization based on human nature. And the founding fathers understood that we have fallen nature, we have darkness within, you know, and then as well as perfectible self, like the divine, godlike, you know, ourselves. And they were trying to somehow reconcile the contradiction, internal contradiction within ourselves, how to hold our unredeemed part of ourselves accountable, right? So there is, that created this systems of checks and balances, right? With three branches of government, each one checking the other,
Yeah.
you know, but then they failed in some ways because they fundamentally have not found a way to, because it's based on human trust, right? Human trust that human beings who are corruptible, you know, so
Right.
obviously they couldn't accomplish what they set out to do. And now we have mathematics, which is incorruptible.
Mm-hmm.
And basing the system on this incorruptible mathematics, you know, we can actually achieve, we find a way to balance, you know, account our own darkness, as well as striving for, you know, yeah, maybe striving for something good, you know.
Yeah, higher human flourishing or higher human civilization, right? So it's, I was talking about this with a friend last night. There is this beneath the surface, I think in all of us, maybe not all of us, but most of us, there's this aspiration to leave the world better than you found it, right?
Right.
I'm not saying this is universal, but it seems like we're born with it, at least. Maybe we have it in our innocence and we lose it later in life, but there's a real struggle because you can want what's better for more people, but then you encounter the harsh scarcities of reality, right? And you've got to take care of this meat suit and go out and, you know, make sure you're okay and somehow balance that with the interest of others.
Yes.
And it looks like the founding fathers were, you know, they were trying to strike that balance. That's what the US Constitution was. And to your point, they recognized human fallibility.
Yes.
It was almost like it was before Marxism, obviously, but it was anti-Marxism in the sense that Marxism was saying, here's the final solution, final answer, the utopia. And the founding fathers are like, no, look, this is based on a Judeo-Christian worldview. I think that we're all fallen, we're all sinful, we're all corruptible. So let's build a non-utopic, decentralized mode of governance that can adapt.
Exactly. And the, you know, honest account of ourselves, that's, I think, one of the contributions that Satoshi Nakamoto did, really, is that he, you know, he made this honest account of ourselves, that we are fallible, right? We have this darkness within, as well as perfectible. And to be able to say, you know, because we tend to kind of deny, you know, our fallibility, right? Like deny greed or tendency to control, dominate others, you know. And then we tend to have this idealistic view of ourselves, like, you know, we humans are good, you know, altruistic and lovable and things like that. And we easily delude ourselves. And I think that Satoshi was able to say, hey, you know, we contain within ourselves this inherent darkness, you know, as a part of nature, that, you know, if you look at the animal kingdoms or natural world, nature is cruel, right? There's this dog eat dog world, and, you know, the the prey and predator and all of that stuff. And we have this animal part within ourselves. And if that is not checked, you know, we could, you know, go out of control, I guess, you know. So just as founding fathers recognize the potential seed for tyranny, I think Satoshi also recognized this. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, we were talking about this a little bit offline, but framing Bitcoin as the philosopher's stone is just so damn interesting, because something that was talked about for many hundreds of years
Right.
this as a number of things, but one was the instantiation of the principles of Christ in matter.
Mm-hmm.
Another was like the unifier of opposites, which we
Right.
talked a little
Yeah.
bit about.
Right.
And then the third way the Philosopher's Stone was described was as an antidote to tyranny in the world.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting because what we have with Bitcoin is a new form of software that's very has a very tight grip on reality through proof of work mining, right? It's like
Right.
integrated to energy, if you will.
Right.
And this technology is having implications or effects on our own code.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way I think about this is, look, we're all, maybe this is not an exact term, but we're running cognitive code. We're all running some kind of
Yeah.
software
Right.
to be
Exactly.
conscious, right? That's what the brain is. It's the organic
Right.
computer, whatever you want to call that. Well, our cognitive code is interfacing or interacting with legal codes and moral codes,
Right.
software
Right.
codes, all these
Right.
different codes we've created for ourselves.
Right. Right.
And the
Yeah.
way I guess maybe the purpose or the intention, maybe not just purpose and earth, the essence of whatever's written into that code has a mutual influential effect on our mind. And that's what seems to be happening with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That
And
is changing us.
what I found interesting is that, we tend to think that laws exist in the outside, right? That laws that are written in a written form. But, a lot of laws actually are internal. Like you said, it's a cognitive, right? So that culture has sets of principles and that regulate our behavior. So for instance, I grew up in Japan. So Japanese culture had certain kind of customs and ways of being, right?
Mhm.
And even though I moved to the US, I carry these laws, within myself. And then when I interact with Americans, for instance, I catch myself, wow, I am operating with Japanese code, right?
Mhm.
And even though so for instance, like we have in Japan, like we have freedom of speech,
Mhm.
but the culture called create a friction because culturally we are not allowed to speak freely. So there are certain, we kind of regulate our behavior at the unconscious level. And
Like
there
a
is no
self-censoring, perhaps.
self-centering, and there is no external law or anything making us to behave like that. Even though the freedom of speech exists technically, but we don't allow ourselves to claim that right because of the cultural code, right? So, so that's why I find it interesting that Bitcoin is global, and Bitcoin is creating a new culture, enabling a new set of universal human rights code, so to speak, and the freedom is universal. Freedom should be applied to everyone, right? Freedom of speech should be applied to everyone around the world, regardless of their background, gender, cultural, religious, background. And then Bitcoin does that. And then Bitcoin really, I think, disrupt the culture code as well. So that's why Bitcoin changes us. Bitcoin changes us to act in a way that we actually can transcend the limitation of our own culture. So
Right.
I find it very empowering to watch that. Like people in El Salvador, they claim freedom, and that Bitcoin development is really changing their culture as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
powerful.
I would go so far to say, if we are running some type of cognitive software, if we just
Right.
describe consciousness as that, you could
Right.
almost say culture is that distributed database of our ancestors' experience, right? We've all been running the software for many, many, many generations, and we codify, I guess, the internal software experience into some external code, which becomes the mythologies that rule our life, whether that's a nation state, your church, whatever. It's codified into this structure.
Story, mythology, story, and even the story of democracy. We abide ourselves. I mean, we carry this mythology of democracy that actually we don't live in a democratic state, right? But then at the same time, there's a story of democracy and history and the things, and we think that we have democracy, and then act within that framework. And what I found interesting is that at the global level, the Fiat system or Fiat culture is based on the certain kind of fundamental, a certain way of looking at human beings, and that
objectifying.
But trace back to the behaviorist ideas of, we don't have anything innate, basically. So we are born with like empty, like tabula rasa, right? And so that everybody can be molded to whatever the state or the people, society wants them to be, right? So if you have this view that we are born with just blank slate of mind, right? We don't have any character, we don't have any personality, we don't have spirit or soul or something that makes us be unique individual. And so if we build society based on this idea, then obviously, everything has to be dependent on the external control, right? And the education becomes such that they want to, fill out, give us information so that we absorb and then we become somebody instead of organically kind of emerging into our personhood, right?
This necessitates top-down control because they don't believe, they think we're blank slates, right? So that someone has to put the message.
Exactly. And then what's interesting is that the behaviorists such as, John B. Watson, I know you probably know these psychologists, but John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner, the famous one is B.F. Skinner. So they basically believe that we don't have free will, basically. And then there isn't anything kind of, they might acknowledge that there is such thing as a mental life, but they thought that it's not observable, and so there's no point of studying or investigating feeling or motives, the internal life of humankind, because we cannot really scientifically approach these data. And so that's why they kind of, for them, thinking is behaving. So they focus on behavior, right? Behavior is observable, behavior is visible. So then, based on this kind of an empirical scientific method to understand human beings, they missed out the large part of what makes us human: consciousness, feeling, the individuality, and then all of that stuff. And then out of that kind of incomplete understanding, they try to build a system, right? And then what I found is that basically central bankers, the people behind central banks, they are behaviorists. They want to control human behavior because they fundamentally do not believe in things like destiny, things like, the individuality, our uniqueness. That's why they are focused on controlling the population, right?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's a very excellent observation. I guess it would probably be useful for us here to try and define freedom, free will, determinism for people. I don't, clearly speaking very biased as someone that describes himself as a freedom maximalist, but I don't understand how anyone can look inside themselves and not understand that they are the ultimate decision maker, right? You may face external pressures, but I always point to Viktor Frankl's Final Human Freedom and Man's Search for Meaning, where he describes that we all have this fundamental freedom that no one can take away, and that is the gap between our circumstances and our response to our circumstances. So that seems very intuitive and obvious to me, but this is a very hotly debated topic. Like, does free will even exist? Are we just deterministic automatons? How do you unpack those concepts?
I mean, for me, okay, so I know that quote of our responsibility, basically, right? So we are like animals, like, we are governed by instinct, right? So then we have instinctual impulses. When we're hungry, we eat, right? And when we are threatened by force, then we automatically, find a way to respond, to react, right, to protect ourselves. And these, instinctually driven act do not involve our consciousness, right? Like, it's like automatic reflex of muscles. Like when you touch something hot, it bypasses our conscious involvement. We say ouch, and we remove our hands, from something hot. And animals are operated, animals are governed by instinct, right? So the nature in some ways protects all the creatures by through instinct, through granting them this wisdom of instinct. And the human beings are also, I think, guided by that, or governed by instinct.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, what sets man apart from animals is that we actually have more flexibility, and we have ability to respond. We have ability to respond to instinctual urges that arise within us. So for instance, animals, for instance, if they are hungry, they hunt, they eat whatever they need to eat. They are, the choices of their course of actions are limited, right? Whereas humans, like if I'm hungry, I could just, I could just steal food that is available and fulfill my hunger. Or I could make a choice to say, I'm going to use my money. I'm going to go to a grocery store and buy something and cook something, right? So that choice, I think, is a very important one, because then humans with that ability to make choices, that are not dictated by animal instinct, allow us to build a civilization, allow us to build the a different way of being that is more, I say, civil, like peaceful, instead of acting out of this, the reptilian brain, aggression and violence and fear. We can go beyond. We can choose to act in a way that is collaborative, and polite or civil, etc., right? Yes. So that space within us, basically, that allow us to make that choice, to withstand in the midst of this instinctual urges. That space, tiny space, is a freedom, in my opinion.
Right.
But I think our culture have to recognize this property of freedom, and cultivate it, so that we could actually, each person can have a conscious relationship to their instinctual urges, and then dictate, instead of being dictated, but to guide their actions through their consciousness, and that leads to the development of morality and development of conscience, And I think that our society, of course, based on this behaviorism, that basically denies free will, denies freedom, doesn't even acknowledge this space, So that's, I think, what Bitcoin is doing is Bitcoin points to that. Bitcoin reminds us of the defining feature of what it means to be human,
right?
And how we are different from other mammals. And although we share something similar and something in common, right? But at the same time, we have responsibility that other animals don't have, other species don't have, and that ties to freedom,
Right. Yeah, it's brilliantly said. So I think you defined here freedom as the absence of compulsion, essentially.
Right, exactly.
So the more we as humanity, we as human beings can get compulsion out of our interrelations,
right,
the better off we are, right? The more reasonable society is. And maybe one way to think about this, so you're describing the instinctual response. I'm reminded of this story of, I think it was Charles Darwin, actually, that he was looking at a glass case with a cobra in it. And when the cobra would strike him, this cobra couldn't hit him, like couldn't get through the glass case, but every time it would strike, he would try to lean his face to the glass case and not recoil when the cobra would strike, but he simply could not do it, right? There was some deeper level operating system taking over. Like every time that snake moves towards you, you recoil. Almost like when you sneeze, you close your eyes, like you can't, there's no override for it, basically.
Exactly, right.
And maybe we could think of that instinct as a very base level code, right? That's a code that animals are running. We're also running.
Right.
but we're different from the animals in that we have this higher order human reason, which is much more sophisticated software, if you will.
Right. Right.
And as you said, the interesting thing there is like, okay, you get hungry. Well, the path of least resistance might be just grab your friend's food and eat it, just steal their food and eat it.
Yeah.
But if we use human reason to engage in delayed gratification, I mean, that is the basis of civilization right there, right? The fact that you decide not to do what's best for your egoic self, but do something that's more reasonable for the long-term interest of yourself and the long-term interest of those around you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kernel around which we build civilization, just deciding to cooperate rather than compulse one another. So is the trick then, and this is where I think Bitcoin's so important, if incentives sculpt or cause outcomes, then isn't our primary aim in the building of human civilization, shouldn't it be, I don't like the word should, but I'll use it here, to remove compulsion, to remove incentives to compulsion rather, right? Make compulsion less profitable, and therefore the outcome of compulsion will go away, and therefore human reason would flourish, and we become more wealthy through more cooperation, less compulsion, things like this.
Exactly. I mean, that's beautifully said, I think. And also, I wanted to point out the fact that instinct itself has wisdom. So it's something that preserves our life, and it has, you know, we shouldn't override the intelligence of it, right? Like try to, like, the nature created us perfectly, so that no way that like, you know, when I touch something hot, you know, I react immediately, and then the speed, you know, I mean, it's just the perfect, right? And if I try to do it better than nature does, I mean, no, you know, we can't. But I think what's happening is that this behaviorist of the world, so to speak, you know, central banks of the world, they denied free will, but also they try to, I think, outsmart nature, so that they they make us not to connect, not to trust our instinct. Mm-hmm. And then they create these institutions, third party, you know, trusted third party systems, and that we have to now, instead of trusting our own intuition and connecting with our body's wisdom, that we are made to trust them. And they basically provided this like moral code, you know, that based on dualistic, you know, moralism or whatever, you know, that tells this is right, this is wrong, you know, the competitive nature is bad, greed is bad, acting out of self-interest is bad, you know, you have to be nice, kind, you know, all of that stuff, you know. So they basically engineered moral code, you know, and that, I think it became very destructive in my opinion, because it's disconnected us from nature, disconnected from our instinct. And then if we don't connect with instinct at the base layer, you know, the freedom that I just talked about, you know, this space, you know, for us to respond meaningfully to the instinctual urges, I mean, that won't work either, you know, because we are not getting the signal from the, if you know what I mean, signal from the, nature, you know, and that,
Yeah. So, I mean, you made the argument here, we have an outline for this conversation, that the behaviorists are essentially viewing free will as an illusion, freedom as an illusion. It's just, it's all deterministic clockwork all the way down. But that obviously doesn't work, because to even say that as a behaviorist, right? Who's driving you? Who's mechanically pulling your strings to make such a comment?
Right.
I'll read one of these quotes you have here, and this is behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner on freedom. He wrote that we do not need to try to discover what personalities, states of mind, feelings, traits of character, plans, purposes, intentions, or other prerequisites of autonomous are really, in order to get on with a scientific analysis of behavior. Thinking is behaving, as you said earlier. The mistake is in allocating the behavior to the mind. So this is a denial of choice, I guess, a denial of the reality of the ability to choose, the ability to respond, a denial of that final
or
human freedom.
self-agency, right? Self-agency or individuality. That's something innate within humanity, basically.
Right. And, and so that's the model. That's the model we built the financial system atop, right? That's the scientific basis of central banking.
Right. And I find it literally, I think that it's just a blindedness, I think, the Skinner, I mean, he's sincere in his, experiment and everything, that he really believes in, this notion that anything that cannot be observable doesn't exist. It's not like he's just doing it to control humans. I mean, it's just he's sincere, right? But it's just he's blind. It's like a blind person can't see the world as, like most of us do, right? It's just that's the world that they see. So I think that central bankers, behaviorists, that they are just blind. That they don't have the comprehension, the real understanding of what human being is. And so I thought about this for a long time, because people tend to say like this world is driven by psychopaths, driven by people with ill intention, and I came to an understanding. It's just they are just blind, they are ignorant, and just as the Gospel of St. John, the Genesis says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and then darkness comprehended not, right? So darkness comprehend light and cannot comprehend light. It's just blind. And in the same way that I find the fiat world is run by people who are blind. And I think what Bitcoin brings is compassion, instead of, fighting against those people or looking at them as enemies. Bitcoin basically shines a light, and in a way that, that darkness become a part of it. And without changing, I mean, it's hard to explain, but I find it's Bitcoin's way of changing the world is very compassionate intervention. It doesn't try to fight with evil, just acknowledge that, okay, just, humanities, you guys are just ignorant. You guys are blind, and now it's time to open your eyes, and here is the light,
Yeah.
So
wow, it's beautifully said. I'm reminded here, I'll be doing this series later with a gentleman, John Vervaeke, on this book, Plato's Critique of Impure Reason. But it talks about how, in Plato's Republic, they're wrestling with the idea of the relative versus the absolute a lot.
Right.
And one of the points they make is that the absolute can actually transcend the relative, but still encompass the relative.
Right.
So it's not, it's kind of like we're transcending our own darkness in a way, but it's by integrate. It's kind of like the Carl Jung thing too, right? Where you integrate your shadow or integrate your inner monster to be a full, a fully developed person. We're almost doing that at like a social level, perhaps.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of understanding that, okay, so the Skinner, behaviorist, you guys see the world through your own lenses, and then it has limitation, of course, and that's okay. That world exists. I give validation to your opinion and then your perspective. I don't anyway try to destroy your world, but there is something more, and here is something more, and you might not recognize, you might not be able to see it, but we could coexist. So then that creates a choice, that creates opening. I think that those who want to go to experience life in a different way, that goes beyond the limitation of the world defined by behaviorists, now we have a choice with Bitcoin. And those who want to stay in that world, please do so. That's
it's your choice.
So that's how I see it.
That's beautifully put. It's Bitcoin. It's kind of a paradox too, where
you're forced, quote unquote, forced to
Right.
interact with Bitcoin at some point,
Right.
but not
Right.
really. You're not actually
Right.
compulsed or coerced. There's just incentives.
Right.
It's in
Right.
your interest to
Right.
save in
Exactly.
Bitcoin versus save in
Right.
dollars, for instance.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that what's interesting is that if behaviorists only can observe behavior, then through Bitcoin, people start behave differently so that they can maybe see behavior, right? So
Right.
what Bitcoin is changing us,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
even anything like if internal feeling or thinking or anything, they could just see the behavior,
Mhm.
and then if they like the behavior, maybe they could adapt Bitcoin,
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. It even convinces behavioralists in the long term, right? Because
Right, exactly,
it
right.
changes people, or so we believe, at least. We could be wrong. Who knows? But
Right.
Now I'd like to tell you about a great new Bitcoin show on the scene that you've got to check out. Brought to you by Swan Studios and Bitcoin Magazine, this show is Hard Money with Natalie Brunell. Natalie is an Emmy-nominated journalist bringing unparalleled experience to the Bitcoin media scene. And personally, Natalie is one of my favorite voices in the Bitcoin space. Each week on Hard Money, you'll get the top headlines of the week with analysis you won't find anywhere else. Hard-hitting interviews with amazing guests like myself and other top minds in the Bitcoin space. And the show will take you directly into the lives being changed by Bitcoin all over the world. Check out Hard Money at swan.com/hard money. Today, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Crowd Health. So, how does health insurance work? You send an egregious amount of money to an insurance company. They hold it in a pool of depreciating fiat currency. Then, when you have a large health event, you have to pay them even more via your deductible. And then you hope they will cover your bill. And in fact, 1 in 6 bills are denied by healthcare.gov plans. It's time to take control of your own healthcare bills. I'd like to introduce you to Crowd Health. It's a decentralization of healthcare using Bitcoin as an alternative to health insurance. Instead of sending fiat currency to a big corporation, you send that money to an account controlled by you, a portion of which is converted into Bitcoin. Then, if you have a big health event, you have a community of Bitcoiners that will use the money in their accounts to help you out. To get more details, go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove, where you can find the promo code for $99 a month for 6 months.
I want to highlight, this idea. We were talking about the behavioralist being blind.
Mhm.
I'm reminded of that quote, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We can get frame blindness, where you put on a certain frame on how you're interpreting a situation or the world, and that may give you clarity on certain features of that world or of that situation, but it will also blind you to certain features, right? Like if you wouldn't want, there's two different types of coordinates. You have like polar coordinates, or you could have the normal coordinates on a map we see. Like if you're at the North Pole, you need a certain kind of frame to deal with that situation that's different from the frame you need when you're at the equator, for instance. And just to like zero in on the behavioralist, you can't interact with someone productively on the basis of behavioralism, right? If I'm assuming that you are just you're just driven by determinism, and I'm driven by determinism, well, then I have nothing to learn from you, and you have nothing to learn from me. So how do we have a productive conversation if that's our philosophy? It just doesn't work. I don't know if I'm articulating it clearly, but if you just try treating someone like that in a conversation, that everything, they have nothing to teach you, and see how that conversation goes, right? It's not real. It doesn't exist in the real world. When you go out into the real world, you engage with someone in conversation, you assume that they have agency, right? That they have freedom, they have free thought, they have critical thinking. They're running the same code to a greater or lesser extent that you're running, and you two can connect and do more operations together than you could in isolation, kind of thing. But the behavioralist viewpoint is just that no, it's not there. Am I interpreting that correctly?
I think the behaviorist point of view really is that we are nothing, right? We are nobody, nothing, and that the impulse for our actions come from the outside. So so there isn't, I mean, there, of course, there isn't any curiosity and interest in one another, right? Because there isn't anything in us.
Right.
And you are the product of a culture. You are a product of, genes, that, genetic determinism. You're born into a certain culture, or, like the India's caste system or monarchy, British monarchy, that you're born into this certain family class, or, and that you are fixed. Your life is just fixed. That's all you could be, and that, I think that is a very, in my opinion, that is depressing, because of
course,
it's promote a sense of victimhood, and that yeah, and I think that fundamentally we are always we are less stressed. We feel not enough. That because then it kind of incentivizes us to become someone, absorb things, consume more, or get degrees, or trying to become someone, because we don't have innate individuality, personality,
right,
or uniqueness, and so, and but to believe that no, we are born with character, we are born with this immortal, individuality, and that gives us, I think, sense of peace, because we don't have to become anything else. That impulses, external impulses cease to exist, like, because if we are internally peaceful, nothing could make us, nothing would coerce us to act in a certain way, if you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, if everyone, well, if everyone was spiritually enlightened, right, you wouldn't be concerned. You couldn't be coerced. Someone put a gun to your head and tell you to do something, you'd be like, whatever. But clearly that's not easy to do. I don't know if it's impossible, but pretty hard to get everyone to that level. But what we can do that's more practical is re-engineer the incentives. So I mean, part of me here with behavioralism is thinking that, it's kind of the basis. It's a rational, I don't want to say rational. It is an intellectual basis for social engineering, right? Because if they're taking this view that everyone's blank slate, well, they need to go out and engineer society. Otherwise, society's not going to engineer itself.
Right.
That doesn't work. I mean, that doesn't. You start to think, you get a God complex in a way, right? Like
I think that's what it is. People. Right. Yeah. They have that complex, and they are the ones who wanted to engage in natural selection. It's nature that selects what has survival value in human trait, not human beings. And I think that that's the behaviorist. I think they just decide, what is good and bad and stuff, and then who should die, who should live, and that's what they're doing, right? It's just by destroying other countries' economy, exploiting, and then all, through inflation and all of that stuff, they use finance as a weapon, and and they say, that's the part of natural selection, right? And what we see is it's a artificially created. I mean, it's not competitive. It's not capitalism. It's not competition based on real competition in the free market. Right. They rig the game, right? They rig this Darwin's, the survival of the fittest game or whatever. And then they say they are playing like God, And so, that's what the economic system has become,
Yeah, and I'm so clearly at odds with that philosophical basis, but there is this grain of truth in that we are all, again, running cognitive software of some kind. We are malleable, we're programmable, we're adaptable. So there seems to be maybe this effort to keep that awareness away from people, keep that amount of self-awareness away from certain people so they can be more easily controlled or programmed.
Yes.
So the competition seems to me, the awareness that we are self-programming entities, right? We're running some kind of software, but we also have agency over how we write that software.
Right.
If you realize that, then you can write your own software, right? I can choose the books I read,
Exactly.
choose the
Right,
cultures I plug into,
right.
businesses, etc. But if I'm
Right.
unaware of that,
Mhm.
especially if I'm afraid and like, living under
Right.
circumstances of depravity or economic
Right.
scarcity, well, I'm much more easily programmed without even
Yes.
realizing I'm being programmed.
Right, exactly.
Right? And that
Right.
seems to be kind of the game that's been played across history
Hiding.
between the ruling class and the ruled class, is you're
Right.
just trying to govern people's
Yeah, right.
movement.
Yeah, that's why it's our, it's we have secret government. Like, I mean, government, it's engaged in secrecy, right? It's like they hide information, knowledge about who we are at the fundamental level, and then they deploy PR, public relations and propaganda, and then feed us with information and manipulate us, right? And Bitcoin brings transparency, of course, and challenges that secrecy of these systems. And and then so those in power, dependent on our ignorance, us not knowing who we are fundamentally, and that how we are being controlled, how we are being programmed, how the incentives or the impulses and motives that we identify ourselves with are artificially created. So, so if we cannot question these motives, the motives that make us act in a certain way, and then immediately identify ourselves with them, then we are not free, because we have to examine where that motives, the impulse come from. Are they coming from ourselves, from within? Are they coming from the code, authentic code provided by nature? Or are they coming from code that is programmed, code that is written by someone? So I think that really the Bitcoin is doing is that Bitcoin provides opportunity for us to claim, our right to engage with code and program, our own code, so to speak,
Right.
And what I found interesting is that, DNA itself is fixed, right? So, the scientist talks about how throughout the history, the surface of the planet has changed, the environment has changed, but the DNA hasn't been changed, so it's kind of fixed. But epigenome is flexible. And I think I firmly believe freedom is coded in our DNA. Freedom is fixed part of what it means to be human. And so it's not a bug, it's a feature that defines humanity. And I think the behaviorists, they, by denying freedom code, that they try to actually change our nature. They try to change DNA, and and I see DNA is like the storing device. It's a device that stores information, like carries the genetic instructions. And then so they created this centralized money that could control genetic information and destroy it even by denying freedom. So that's, I think, the fundamentally, I think the fiat money has become, and the Bitcoin makes, allow us to claim the sacred property of DNA, basically, and that the DNA has metaphysical dimension as well that modern scientists don't even understand. I mean, science hasn't really understand what life is about, right? They have, the majority of DNA is called like junk DNA. You probably heard this expression, right? Junk DNA. Or that Einstein said the spooky DNA, and that they don't even know what they're doing, and then now, I mean, we see what's happening with this experimental injection and the stuff, they are actually trying to alter, our own DNA, to destroy the sacred property. That's, I think, where we are going,
Wow.
So yeah, so Bitcoin really, it's makes human nature immutable. No one can change it. And then it allows us to consciously engage with our DNA so that we can maybe transcend, the limitation of like we could actually meaningfully engage with what is inherited from our parents or ancestors. We don't have to become a victim of our genes. We can heal our trauma. We can, find a way to respond differently.
Well, and we need to heal. We
Yes.
have a lot of trauma through
Right.
just the past 5,000 years of human history. We've been quite animalistic, but also ascending, right? We're making progress.
Yes.
We're freer,
Yes.
more or less than ever, depending on where you are.
Right.
There's been fits and starts, let's say. But what so it seems like then the internet is just the big game changer here, right? The whole media technology and media landscape, so the channels through which we communicate and organize ourselves just completely got flipped over in the past 20 years, right? And you've seen that with all the FANG stocks, right? Disrupting legacy advertising and media and whatnot, music, everything.
Yes.
We've become quite integrated with these machines, digital tools, smartphones. They are an extension of this code we're calling human reason or human consciousness. And it appears to me that maybe all of the institutions that we built up before this technological revolution are now shimmying, right? They're kind of shuddering, trying to figure out how do they maintain relevance in this new technological landscape. And so Bitcoin then is freedom on the internet, or the battle for the freedom of the internet, battle for the freedom of this new communication technology landscape. How can we explain this to people in a way that's comprehensible? Because even hearing myself say it sounds like it just sounds way out there, but it really seems fundamental. It's like we're all communicating, we're all running this code, sharing this code. The way we share this code just changed dramatically through, we again, if we're running digital technology, cognitive software, well, we just invented software. That's a really big deal.
Yes.
I
I fundamentally see internet as a tool, right? Like, I think this perspective of internet is a tool that could be used to emancipate humanity. I think that's how I see it. But for that to happen, we have to have freedom of the internet. Internet has to be free. And now internet has been infiltrated with, commercial interest and surveillance industries, and so it's has been centralized, and it's doing the opposite of what it was meant to do, and my background, I was engaged in WikiLeaks. I was a journalist covering WikiLeaks for the last decade. And I was inspired by Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, who is a notable cypherpunk. And he believes in the freedom of the internet and the importance of free internet to emancipate humanity, to liberate humanity. And I think that now what's happening is the internet was a precursor to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is the key that built on internet. Bitcoin enables the platform at the global scale. So for us, people around the world, to connect, to communicate, and to start to build, start to claim our own freedom and build a new civilization. And for that to happen, we have to have internet and Bitcoin as tools, So it's important, I think, for us to recognize that these are tools, but not, and so it's a question is how we could use these tools. But it's not the goal, it's use this to achieve something. And that's, I think, I don't want to say this is going to be the battle, but the fact that, there are people who don't want human to have freedom, they are so-called adversary forces or whatever, that we will we have to face the confrontation, I think, people who want to own, people who want to centralize internet,
Yes.
people who want to centralize money so that humankind cannot attain freedom. So,
Right.
yeah, so I think this is our battle, I think,
Yes, no, beautifully said. And I guess you could say that the battle for freedom is ultimately about having,
peaceful battle.
yeah, it's everyone having their input, right? And how we construct this whole thing. That's what democracy, that's
Right.
the framing for democracy. At least it doesn't work in practice, but it's everyone has a say, everyone has a voice.
Right, exactly. And I think it's the change is that, it's a network effect, through hyper Bitcoinization. So each person basically aligning themselves with the laws of nature, and like learning the code. I mean, the learning through node, Bitcoin Core. That's kind of a practice of saying, okay, this is the code that I choose, right? So because Bitcoin developers, they don't, they just provide the code for us to choose. We are the one who have to choose, which code that we want to run, and that creates network effect, right? And expand the network and allowing other people to join. And it makes it easier for other people to align themselves with laws of nature. So that's, it is a battle, but it's a different kind of battle. It's battle that can be engaged with each person upholding his or her own truth, and defending that truth. And, and that kind of reminds me again, going back to the Constitution, basically the, people in the United States that their task is to uphold the Constitution, right? Mm-hmm. So in the same way that we could uphold our own truth, and everybody on this planet that that we can uphold code, mm-hmm. And decide, this is what's important to us, So I think that it's not really a battle, but it requires determination and commitment, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I like alignment with the truth of choice, perhaps, right? That is our nature, right? We do choose. That's what human reason is, right? We choose means to pursue ends. Right. And Bitcoin is just mapping on to that reality. It's like you get the maximum amount of choice or optionality possible.
Right.
And in that way, it's a quote unquote battle for freedom, but really it's a peaceful protest ultimately, because you're like, I'm just going to hold my life energy in this system that you can't do anything about.
Yeah.
So and therefore I have the choice.
Exactly. And I think that's why I think Bitcoin is an experiment, I think, important experiment. And that who knows, I mean, humanity, each individual decide, what code that we are gonna, each person decide, choose to learn. And then we might choose, some people don't want to have freedom, and some people don't want to have Bitcoin and fork off. There is a lot of chain forks and and then create different coins, right. Maybe. But so Bitcoin doesn't impose, it's provide a choice. But I hope that, I kind of think that nature wants us to succeed, and nature wants us to perhaps, claim the gift of freedom. Mm-hmm. So, the Bitcoin's there, but we have to be the one who choose,
Right.
So I find it beautiful in some ways, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not my individual choice. I'm depending on the collective. I'm depending on you choosing freedom and other people, because that creates a network effect and define what it means to be human,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that mutual selection process where you're basically betting on other people choosing freedom. Well, that network effect becomes more abundant, more wealthy, more, it's a better life, obviously. And it's not, again, I always talk about this, and I don't want it to sound kumbaya, let's all hold hands and sing, but it's like, no, cooperation actually creates more wealth per unit of human effort or time. So you're richer, there's less to fight about, there's less problems in the world, less scarcity. That is the outcome of this. So it's a very practical outcome.
Yes.
not just us, holding hands and singing by the fire. So
right. And then, the legal scholar, Nick Szabo, who created the big gold, which was precursor to Bitcoin, he defines money as a tool for technology for cooperation, right? So that it gave us basically capacity, option or a different avenue for us to, engage with our instinctual impulses, perhaps. So then, Bitcoin provides the choice for us to, become human, and not just to act like animals, engaging in violence and controlling other people and then destroying environment and, all of that stuff. But, maybe we could become human. We could act civil. We could be kind to each other, So that's, but we have to choose it, right? So I find it's just beautiful to me. It's just whatever the God or whatever, provided a tool, but we have to do the work,
Right. We have to do the work.
Right. Humans, it's dependent on human freedom, human free will to choose. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to look at it. Is Bitcoin is proof of work, but it doesn't succeed unless we do the work ultimately.
Exactly. Right. Right. Exactly.
So yeah, really, really good stuff there. I talk a lot about the book, The Sovereign Individual. I've written a essay series called Sovereignism, kind of exploring where this takes the world. That's the big unknown for me. I think Bitcoin has a high probability of success, but we can tell directionally sort of where the world goes, but it's hard to say what it actually looks like, of course, in practice. So how do you think about individual sovereignty? How do you see the world unfolding differently in the wake of Bitcoin's success?
In the wake of Bitcoin success, I personally believe in things like destiny. That each person is here with certain goals. Certain mission or the gift to give. And right now, I think, I think humanity is living in a state of ignorance, and that because of it, that I think that we are not really living our own lives, so to speak, And I think what Bitcoin does is that it's because it aligns each person with laws of nature, and that I think people start to find what makes them unique, and discover a gift that they can give, or look at the life in a different way, that maybe our existence on this planet as a form of schooling. We learn something new. We learn lessons, and I think that would change the quality of life. That would change how we interact with other human beings. If we start to think that our existence on this planet is a gift, that we are here for a reason, and that there are certain maybe plans, maybe that we create for ourselves or whatever, then our life, we start to slow down in our life, start to shift our values, relationships, or the things that are maybe not necessarily material. We start to value things that are not tangible, right? Like psychological and like happiness, how much love that we give to each other, those kind of things. So I think it fundamentally changes the quality of life. And when humans are happy, I think everybody, all creatures is going to be happy too. You know what I mean? So yeah.
That's a great way to look at it. I'm again just sort of thinking out loud here that we have this fiat system, or the system premised on compulsion, coercion.
Yes,
it's forcing or incentivizing humans to fight over wealth, to fight over stuff. Mm-hmm. But the real pernicious paradox here is that very fighting inhibits our ability to produce more wealth and stuff.
Exactly.
So I always describe it as like we're sawing off the very branch on which we're sitting. It is so self-destructive and crazy. And I think to your point, if we would get compulsion out of the system, we would produce more wealth. It just focused on material wealth.
Right.
And what does that mean? It means that material wealth, by comparison, is overall less important, right? You can make ends meet with less work, basically.
Right.
And so maybe then in that world, we would be free to focus more on higher pursuits, spiritual pursuits,
yes.
artistic
Right.
pursuits, love,
Exactly.
interpersonal healing,
Right.
all of these
Right.
things.
Right. And I think that one of the compulsion, the urge, is the will to power. And that's Friedrich Nietzsche talks about, developed this concept of will to power. And he connected that with the, Darwin's natural selection, that it's like a force of nature, it's that we all have this will to power. And I think, but this will to power became destructive now, because it's will to conquer, it's will to dominate, and I think that at the root of that, impulse is lack of acceptance, lack of love, lack of accepting the fact that we have this unique individuality that cannot be destroyed, and that cannot be counterfeited. It's authentic, something authentic, and then we don't have to prove it. We have it within. And so I think that the will, that this untamed will, that is driving the world into madness now, can be only tamed with love, and I think that Bitcoin bring that element. I mean, Bitcoin has this healing property, that help us find that within ourselves.
That's beautiful. Yeah, you said something really profound to me before we started recording. You said you thought that love is founded on freedom.
Yes, right.
And I think this is obvious to anyone. Like, you can't force love. You cannot force yourself to love someone, nor can you force someone to love you. Clearly, it's mutual, voluntary. That's the only way it works in any sustainable way. So what,
if you think about the love, okay, like, I think our culture conflate love with instinctual, sexual lust, and so when somebody is infatuated with someone, like, oh, you must be in love, you fall in love with someone, but that's, when you look at their behavior, they just fall in love. It's like there's this compulsion, right, to fall in love with someone, and there's this sexual attraction or instinctual attraction that aligns without your even involvement, right? And if you just act on it, is it really, where is your consciousness, right? How is it different than animals, eating something because they are hungry, right? There isn't much difference. Right. And I'm not saying that, the instinctual love, the sexual love is not a part of love. Of course, it's a foundation. It's, but I think humans can choose to love, out of their own freedom. If there's, like, for instance, like if I see someone who is suffering, on the street, if I act on this compulsion to help because I feel bad, like, oh God, this person I so much empathize with this person, and I cannot even stop myself. Like I without knowing, I just help the person, or I feel guilt if I don't do it, right? That's not really an act of love. If I have a choice saying, okay, this person is suffering, I could choose to do this, or I could not choose to do this. But if I, out of myself, choose to help the person, that's an act of love for me, because I think it's like you made a conscious choice, Yeah.
Yeah, no, great points there. And I would add, love, that's such a loaded term in English, and it's I always again, Vervaeke unpacked this for me, but like the ancient Greeks, they had many words for love, but three were really stood out to me, and they were eros, philia, and agape. So eros, which is something we'd associate with the word erotic, perhaps. It's like just to consume, right? To consume. And it's not just erotic, because you could also be consuming an apple, consuming food, right? I love this food. But it could also be consumptive in a sexual relationship.
Mhm.
But that's all very animalistic, right? That's very base level, instinct level. There's a level up called philia, in that you want ongoing reciprocal interaction with the person,
Right,
right? So you don't want to eat your friends, for instance.
right, right,
You want to
right,
have friends, right? You
right,
want
right,
to interact with them and have this
right,
ongoing loving relationship. And then, of course, the most powerful form of love, which is also very central to the Bible, is agape.
right.
And that is that, when you bring your newborn child home,
Mhm.
you can't even say that you love them in the sense of philia, because there's not much reciprocity taking place. They're
Right,
basically
right,
an inert lump when they first come
yes,
home,
yes.
yet you love them
Right,
with
right.
so much ultimate selflessness. It's overwhelming. So it seems like in English we've created a ton of distortion by just jamming
Right,
all of those meanings,
no,
eros,
right,
philia, and agape, into one word called love, and we're all
right,
like, I
right.
love this, I love that, I love you.
Yes. And
um
I think that, I mean, if you look at the animal kingdom or nature, the natural world, there's this food pyramid, right? So that there is this prey, predators, and so that lions are supposed to eat rabbit, and rabbits are supposed to eat rat or something, so that there is this hierarchy, kind of a natural hierarchy.
Food
And that,
chain.
yeah, food chain,
Yeah.
and it goes around. I mean, it's like top goes down, and it's like a circle, but it has
Mhm.
a pyramid, right? So that means that basically lions, the animals cannot have a relationship out of themselves. Like they are locked in this kind of food chain, right? And so humans, on the other hand, I think we could introduce a different, we could develop a sense of brotherhood, the relationship based on the heart. And
Mhm.
that goes out of this prey predator, I'm going to eat you or you'll be eaten kind of animalistic kind of, uh, you know, defined locked in relationship,
Mhm.
right? So I think that, like lion and lamb, sheep, I mean, they do not lie together peacefully. It's like lion, when they get hungry, they would eat them, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
won't see them developing friendship, I guess.
Mhm.
Maybe they do, but humans, on the other hand, I think we could, like men and women, like men don't have to act on sexual impulse, or they could develop friendship with over the
Mhm.
sex,
Mhm.
and then develop brotherhood, and I like to see, or I think that Bitcoin gives us a tool to maybe spiritualize economy, so that we could have like associative economics, we could have, economic studies maybe permeated by heart, through principles of mutual aid, voluntary association, and not like, predatory capitalism, like, okay, I'm gonna just, screw you over, if you don't pay light, and I'm gonna put you into debt slave and things like that. But it's more like mutual aid, I care about you, so, I transact with you, and then you
Mhm.
would
Mhm.
return favor, that kind of thing.
Yeah, again, back to just, if Bitcoin can incentivize cooperation at
Hmm.
scale, then that's the same thing as saying disincentivizing compulsion, right? So we're
Yes,
creating
yes,
more freedom
right. Yes,
in
yes,
aggregate for humans.
right.
This gives us the economic, um, we were established in the free market economic process at this point in a way that lets us transcend material concerns. We're just producing more wealth, and that's just
Right,
a
right,
flat out economic reality.
right,
And then we can engage with one another, because material concerns are just a smaller proportion of our actual concerns.
right,
We
right,
would engage with one another, presumably at a more heart
right.
or spiritual
Yes, or
basis.
at least the Bitcoin creates create opening for people who are ready for that. Because I think
Yeah.
there are people who like to consume, and who like to possess material things, and everybody is at a different stage on their journey. And I think that people who want to accumulate wealth and material goods, I think they should do it. I mean, there is no need for them to suppress their urge or anything. If that's
Right.
authentic, it's just them being authentic, just go for it. But I think that, right, the problem of the existing system is that it just denies the other hand, it's just separate. I mean, it doesn't give us choice, basically.
Right.
So then because people who don't want to live like that,
Yes.
and they don't have to be a part of that system if they choose to.
Yeah, it comes back. It always comes back to that magic word, choice. We just
Right.
don't constrict choice. The less we constrict choice, the better off we all are ultimately.
Right.
And it's just difficult for individuals to resist the temptation, I suppose. Right? It's much easier to steal a guy's garden than to plant the garden and do the whole thing. Right? You could just
right. Exactly. And then instead of external forces that try to regulate, try to punish us, each person should be given the option. I mean, in an authoritarian society, like, you are not even given a choice to, not to act on instinct or not, right? Because the society just says, you cannot do this. You cannot speak freely. And if you do this, these are the punishment. Or even nowadays, technologically, it makes it impossible for us to act in a certain way. The China's social credit scoring system, for instance, it's algorithm that makes it impossible, right, for people to engage in activities that are deemed to be criminal or not favorable. So what important thing is that it just allow everything, allow us to act freely, and we will face the consequence. If you want to act out of instinct, go for it, and then you would just face the consequence. Then you learn the lesson, right?
Right.
Like, you are preventing someone from learning lesson and growing from that,
Right.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it too. It just, you are reintegrating individuals with the responsibility of their actions.
Yes, right. And without having the choice to learn, how can one develop morality? How can one develop responsibility, right? So that's the whole thing, that when I think liberals now, they are obsessed with this, virtue signaling, and trying to say, like, this is the right thing and this is wrong, and you make sure that their speech would be banned and things like that. But you are, by doing that, you are depriving people's ability to learn, people's ability to claim their responsibility. It's like it's like the parents, they want kids to learn what out of themselves what is right things to do, instead of imposing morality. So then they end up becoming automaton, right? They just only do good things because they try to avoid the punishment. That's not morality.
Right.
That's not responsibility. So the freedom is the foundation for us to develop capacity for morality and responsibility.
Yeah, beautifully said. And then without choice, we obviously can't develop morality and these other higher order constructs of human reason, right, that separate us from animal, again, allowing us to become more civilized. But to the earlier point, without the power of choice, how can we love?
Yes.
Right. So it's almost like you're injecting all of this coercion and compulsion that's anti-love in a way, because you can't force this thing. And
anti-love.
Yeah, and again, we mentioned this at the top of the show, the Bitcoin being like the philosopher's stone that unifies opposites.
Right.
This one just occurred to me recently. I mentioned to you after reading this book, The Way of the Superior Man, but love is also what unifies opposites, right? That's what brings masculine and feminine energies together. Love, it transcends it. It's kind of like the central axis to everything, it seems like. And there's a lot of wisdom traditions, a lot of people that take psychedelics. They all describe love being like the basis of reality in some way. So have we discovered something with Bitcoin? Is like the technology that maps closest to love?
Now being a unifying force of opposite. I mean, that's a very important point, because Jung also talks about, right, the Jung's work of alchemy, that the first step is to differentiate. So to basically create the opposite, right? So and you know, in the Bible story, Genesis, the story of the tree of knowledge, and is to know, you know, after they ate a tree of knowledge, I mean the fruits from the tree of knowledge, they started to learn what is good versus right, good, evil, and stuff. So it created the duality, right?
Yes.
And that duality, I think, is a part of this ego function. It's the abstraction, you know, of our soul, that, you know, we tend to kind of, that's how our mind works, right? Like say, this is good, this is bad, or left and right, that this polarity. The
ratio, comparison,
right,
all of these things.
Exactly. And then that, you know, became a moral code in our, you know, in you know, cognitive capacity, and that we start to act in a certain way. Like we try to be good, right? I think everybody goes through this journey, goes through this process that, you know, we want to become a good person. We wanted to prove to be a good, honest, you know, nice, or whatever the society defines to be good. So then we try to avoid the whatever that is not considered to be good. So then, so that creates the opposite, right? And the tension within ourselves. And then there comes time, the love, you know, as a unifying force that comes through us to unite these opposites. So then, you know, and then that's, I think it's like love is like fruits from the tree of life, right? So because we have tree of knowledge and the tree of life, you know, people don't talk about tree of life, right? But then there is other tree. And I think that tree of life, the love as a fruit from the tree of life, that unifies the opposite, and it gives wisdom, because, you know, it's not, we know what is right and wrong, you know, right? It's not like, you know, we don't know. Like then it's like a child. Okay, child, they don't know what is right from good. I mean, from bad or anything, you know. But we have to go through this process. We have to engage in this opposite, right? And polarize ourselves and know what is right and wrong. And we make efforts to have this one-sidedness in a sense. But then we transcend that, you know, and it comes to the point where, oh, there isn't right and wrong. It's kind of unifying force. And that creates the transformative, you know, it's a philosopher's stone, which is wisdom. Right. You know, but from a person looking at, you know, the person who has gone through the transformation, from the outside, that person looked like just going back to the childlike state. Like, wow, you know, you don't know what is good and wrong, or, you know, but that person is enlightened. That person has wisdom. And it's not like that person just regress back to the childhood. You know, it's regress back to the innocence. No, I mean, the person gained wisdom after going through, after eating the fruits of you know, the tree of knowledge. The tree of knowledge, yeah. Wow. And then given life, new life, kind of, you know. Yeah. And then that brings life, right? Love is the unifying force that bring men and women together, and, you know, give, you know, like we give birth to a child, you know, completely new life. I mean, that's amazing, right? It's yeah, I mean, if you think about it. And then I think that's what Bitcoin is doing, right? Welcoming each person, I think, welcoming each Bitcoiner to, you know, go through this journey, and so that we would receive love, you know, and gain wisdom. Yeah, you know? Wow, it's really it's mind-boggling, to say the least. But yeah, the idea of Bitcoin being just so open and inclusive, right? It can literally unify opposites, right? You could be the most hardcore leftist and the hardcore rightist, and they'll both appreciate Bitcoin because it empowers choice, it empowers the individual. Right. So maybe that's why, you know, like love, Bitcoin conquers all in the long run. Yes, Bitcoin is neutral. And I think that once we understand what Bitcoin does, I think we would understand the necessity of the fiat system, that how maybe humanity had to go through this darkness as a part of, you know, journey. And then we learn what is good and wrong, and, you know, engage in this battle of the good and evil, to find the good. They are just the opposite side of the same coin. Right.
Two
teaches
sides
us.
of the same heart, right?
Yeah, that's the teaching us something important so that we can develop capacity for love, and that's just, that's amazing to me,
It's beautiful.
yeah.
It's a beautiful bright orange future if we do the work, I guess.
Yes, if we do the work, yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Nozomi, this has been an amazing conversation. I really, really appreciate the work you're doing. I hope you keep writing. I mean, the writing
Yes.
is really, really good. If you could just please let my audience know where they can find out more about you or your work. And I think you're on Substack as well. So if you want to mention
Yes,
that.
I just started Substack, The Way of Heart. That's my new writing platform. And I don't tweet much, and I don't engage myself on Twitter intentionally. I try to stay out of drama. But when I publish new articles or podcast interviews or whatever, I would tweet that out. So the best place to follow me is on Twitter. And my Twitter account is Nozomi Majin.
Okay, wonderful. We'll link to all that in the show notes. Nozomi, yeah, I hope we can have this conversation again soon and hopefully have some more insight as to whether we're crazy or this bright orange future is
Oh,
actually possible.
no, I don't think we are crazy.
Thanks so much. I look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you for having me.